Hello again, everybody. This is Dan Clouser, and welcome back to the Journey of My Mother's Son podcast. Today I'm joined with Christian Ray Flores, who is an entrepreneur, evangelist, philanthropist, investor, and coach, and many, many more things, as you'll find out throughout the conversation. Christian, thanks for joining me today.
Dan, it's a pleasure. I'm delighted to be here. Thanks.
I'm looking forward to this. I know we had to reschedule at one point, so we're a little later than when we initially were going to record, but I always say everything happens for a reason, and it always, works
Yeah.
out to be the best timing ever. So, looking forward to this conversation. You got a lot of stuff going on. You got a lot of life experience. But before we get started, just introduce yourself in your own words. Who is Christian today?
I do a few things, so perhaps multi-interest kind of professionally ADHD kind of person. So
My kind of guy.
exactly. So I do high performance coaching. I write. I do philanthropy in the third world. I also have a digital media brand strategy company. So those are my main focuses right now. And those things sort of stem from a very eclectic childhood and youth and all the way to adulthood that is sort of, it seems to be very unusual because I basically managed to witness a military coup in Chile, a civil war in Mozambique, in Africa, and then the fall of the Soviet Union in Russia. By the time I was, in my early 20s. So that's the background.
Yeah, yeah, quite a bit of stuff as you've been able to witness firsthand, which I'm sure, everybody says that we're living in a crazy world today, which I certainly agree with that. But I think you can probably pick times in history where the
Mhm.
world's been crazy pretty much all the time at certain spots. And I think you
Yes.
can attest to that
Yes.
with your experience. But one thing I want to dial in on to start here, we're going to talk about a lot, but you mentioned you're a philanthropist, and I come from a background of running a youth nonprofit sports organization, so giving
Mhm.
back was always something that was part of my DNA. My mother and father were both very giving individuals in their own separate ways. My mom was one who never had a lot of money throughout her lifetime, but had time and was always willing to, get out there and get her hands dirty and help out however she could. My father, on the other hand, didn't have a whole lot of time because he drove truck for a living. But if there was a cause that he believed in that needed a little bit of money, whether it was a small donation or a large donation, he was always willing to help. So, tell me a little bit about what started you on that path of giving back and getting involved and wanting to help other people out.
It was really two things. One is what you mentioned, is sort of being in the very thick of pretty extreme situations, but also poverty, right? So I experienced poverty myself, and you know, I lived in the Soviet Union for a while. I slept in the kitchen. We didn't have enough food. We weren't hungry, but it was just a lot of scarcity there. Not enough clothes, not enough all kinds of things, not enough opportunity. But then I also spent my childhood in Mozambique. Mozambique is still one of the poorest countries in the world. And about 70 plus percent of the population right now lives on under $2.50 a day, which is extreme, extreme, extreme poverty.
Wow.
So, knowing, if you can watch it on TV, but if you live in those spaces, it just changes you. I think you have just a deeper inside out understanding of poverty. Now, the desire to help didn't kick in until I actually was in my mid 20s. I was I was inspired by musicians. I was a musician, a very successful musician in Russia. I was playing sports arenas, big venues, entertaining millions of people. And something stuck with me from a few years before I hit it big. And it was these two charitable things that happened. One was in Great Britain called Band Aid,
Hmm.
and they had a massive concert at Wembley Sports Arena, and they raised just tens of millions of dollars for the poor. I think it was at the time in Ethiopia there was a famine, and then I think fairly quickly following that, inspired by Band Aid, the American producer Quincy Jones created in partnership with a couple other people, We Are the World, which was basically a studio recording that had, I think, 40 plus of the most talented people on earth in one studio, which is just unbelievable. And I was so inspired by that because I never thought of it. I never thought that's a thing, right? People that have everything are using their platform to give to those who have nothing. And so when I became famous, I also became a Christian around the same time. It sort of softened me as well. I had a friend who ran a charity and he was serving orphans at the time in Moscow. And we started scheming together and started doing these big events with once a year, twice a year. We would bus in like several thousand orphans. It was amazing. Hundreds of volunteers. And we'll do sports event during the day and then a gala concert during in the evening. I would perform. I would bring my celebrity friends. So just being in touch with those orphans, not once a year because we came and visited them all the time. Had a very specific orphanage that I would just felt very connected to, and would hang out and would bring stuff to do. Which we would play music for them, would hang out with them, learn about their story. And it got me hooked on that. It felt good. It felt true. It felt necessary. So I've basically have been doing philanthropy ever since in Latin America for a few years, and then now in Africa.
Yeah. I love that. And so many things in that story I can relate to myself because after my mom and dad got divorced, I moved to Florida with my mom for about 4 years before I started going down the wrong path and getting into a lot of trouble. And she decided, you know what, you're heading back to Pennsylvania with your dad, which is literally a decision that saved my life. I guarantee I would not be here today if it wasn't for that decision. I would either be dead or in prison, guaranteed. Um, but I saw my mom work, you know, 3 jobs, 4 jobs. And again, similar to you, you know, I never went hungry, but I also saw what it took for her to put food on the table for us, you know? Um, and yet somehow she still figured out a way to, make it to my little league games and my sporting events and get me to all this stuff. She would take me to a department store to get my school clothing, and then she would stop at Goodwill on the way home to get her clothing, so something that really, just always impacted me was seeing the sacrifices she made, um, so that as a kid, I didn't notice, like I said, I knew we were poor, but it wasn't like I ever went without a shirt on my back or shoes on my feet. Like she figured it out. And as I got older and reflected back on that is when it really kind of started to hit me with, what she did. Um, and when you started talking about the orphans, and working with, being involved in an orphanage directly, back in 2006, I believe it was, my wife and I went on a cruise, the only cruise we ever went on to. And one of our excursions was actually to an orphanage in Roatan, Honduras. And um, you know, like you said, when you sit there and have conversations with these kids and hear their story, it makes a huge, huge impact. And it led me to start a wing of our organization at the time that was called the World Equipment Outreach, and we actually they were looking to build a baseball field in the orphanage. And they didn't have any equipment and they needed equipment. So we actually collected equipment in our area up in Pennsylvania and shipped it down to them for several years. So it really, again, when you have that interaction, it changes you, you know,
It
in a
does,
way
yeah.
that, again, you and I can relate to it. I hope that listeners, who haven't had that firsthand experience can really understand how the effect it had on, you and I through that, through our
Mhm.
conversation here. But was there anything in particular about those those interactions that just left an indelible mark on you to to want to get involved and give what you could?
Well, there were so many. I think the initial connection was with the orphans, right? But I've had countless encounters and conversations and relationships ever since, now for, almost 30 years. Um, the first one I think that really got me hooked was I was visiting the orphanage and I was just hanging out with some of those kids and just asking them about their life. And this one little girl, I think she was maybe 9. And I said, so, what happened? Where are your parents? And she goes, well, my mom is dead. And I said, oh, I'm so sorry. Um, where's your dad? And she goes, well, my dad's in jail because he killed my mom.
Wow.
You know, so it's one of those
Wow.
things that you just don't expect it.
Yeah.
And in that moment, you realize this child's world has collapsed. And maybe she has um, a roof over her head in the orphanage. She has food, she can survive. But the human needs are much more than that, right? So a friendship, connection, joy, belonging, all of those things matter tremendously. We run this after school academy in Mozambique, Maputo, right now, and it's a small project that I started a few years ago. And the kids there, they most of them live in these sort of slums around the city. So things there's so much despair in the sort of in the provinces, right? Where the mostly agrarian places, sort of subsistence living type stuff that people sometimes move closer to the city in hopes of finding some sort of employment it's that's a lot of despair, but it's better than the despair they know back home. So they ended up in these slums, right? These completely, places with no running water. They might have a well, a pump somewhere nearby. They have a sort of a hole in the ground for the toilet, and they live in these places. The the houses are sort of corrugated steel roofs, perhaps cinder block at best, cinder block walls, maybe a cement floor, maybe a dirt floor. But that's basically those are the living conditions. And when I hang out with them and I go into those areas and just sit and speak to the families, one of the things that caught my attention powerfully is that those kids, they're super smart, but they don't have an example of success. The people that they know who may be relative to them successful, maybe they deal drugs or they're criminals in those same neighborhoods. That's all they have. They don't really know anyone who's middle class. Like never
Right.
talk to them.
Right.
The other thing is that most of those, because of the deep dysfunction and the despair, most of those kids don't have a mom and a dad at home. They may have one of them. They may have an aunt or maybe a grandmother, and it's just that kind of almost like splintered family situation, which doesn't help them with self-esteem, doesn't help them with wisdom. They're not really taught character, sort of a mindset, right? Of growth mindset. No one teaches them at all.
Right.
So a lot of it is from the inside out problems, not even outside problems. Outside problems are secondary, actually,
Yeah.
And then there's the outside problem. The outside problems, they go to a school. Thank God that they have a school that is paid by the government. And I know that school. I've done even work with that school. And, it's just so basic that in the modern world, they have very little help to even reach the lower rung of the economic ladder, right? So, let's just give you a description. We had to raise money to repair their toilets. They have 1,800 kids in that school,
Wow.
and the toilet was just not working. Like it was just horrible. And we repaired it, etc. But it's just bare walls. There's no really wall. The walls around the school are half collapsed, so anybody can come in and out. That's not safe.
Right.
They had 3 computers for 1,800 people, and one was used by sort of the liaison to the government, who sort of oversees the school because it's a government school, and then 2 were used by all the teachers to sort of grade and maybe I think it was really more about reporting, about grading to whoever. That's it. But the kids don't have access to the internet. Now, so in the academy, what we do is we solve those problems, right? So after school, they go to a place and there's air conditioning, there's desks, they have a uniform, they get a meal. They're around for several hours around middle class Mozambicans who have jobs in the city, right? They could be teachers, they could be lawyers, they could be all kinds of people. But people they've never met. I mean, they live in the same city, but it could be across, it could be a parallel universe.
Right.
Um, so they and those mentors who are usually members of a local church, they tell them about character and about values and about their value, that they are valuable. So from the inside out, that changes. Then they all have laptops to work on. So they have access to the internet, they get to know how to use a computer, how to use the internet, and then slowly but surely they'll eventually have skills that are marketable skills. The third thing they do is they learn English. And of course, if you know English and your computers in Mozambique, you're very employable. And the idea is that, you start them off maybe at 8, 9 years. By the time they're teenagers, they're basically going to be, most of them are going to be out of poverty. This is even without college.
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah. And I think to give them a path is so important. And
Yeah,
it's so important again to be able to see, like what's the phrase? If you can see it, you can be it, right? So
exactly.
if
Yep.
all you see around you is poverty and more poverty and no success, like that's what you're going to be,
That's it. Yeah. They
you
can't even
know?
imagine. They can't
Yeah.
imagine it. And now they can. Like we have interviews with them. If you go to Ascend with a D at the end, ascend.academy, you'll see little interviews of them saying, we ask them, okay, so who are you? What do you like about the academy? Who do you want to be?
Yeah.
And these kids like that are in completely desperate situations. You can see their homes behind them when we interview them. They go, well, I want to be a policeman. I want to be a lawyer. I want to be a doctor.
Yeah.
I want to be a business person. So where'd they get that? Well, they
Right.
got that because they're hanging out with people like that.
So important. So
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
Um, I want to talk about, you mentioned the Quincy Jones project, We Are the World, and how that influenced you, as well as Band-Aid. And again, if anybody hasn't seen the documentary on We Are the World, I don't remember if it's on Netflix or if it was on Prime, but it's
I
absolutely
think I
fascinating.
think it's Netflix. Yeah.
Yeah,
Biggest night in show business, something like, or
something like
biggest night
that.
in music. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating to, hear all of those, stars, how some of them were intimidated to be in the room with others, even though they were at the top of their game. And
Hmm.
like you said, they had everything and they were giving back. So, a couple things I want to talk about there. You mentioned, at the height of your career, where you were famous, um, and got into giving back. Like when you're at that level, because I've met people all across, the world and all types, former professional athletes, um, who made a lot of money through their careers, but it doesn't always make them a good person, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So, what was it that kept you grounded that even at the, height of your success, you know, lots of other influences, I'm sure, coming at you in your life of things that you could do with your time. What was it that kept you grounded that you wanted to give back the
Faith,
way you did?
faith.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was not I mean, I was a good guy, quote unquote, but I was not a good person on all
Mhm.
kinds of levels, until until I met this guy who was a Canadian missionary in Moscow. I just had breakfast with him like 3 days ago here in Austin, and he just had this light about him. Like it's hard to explain it any other way. It's like an aura, right? Like a presence, an energy that was just so peaceful, so clear, fearless. And he had this incredible family. And I come from 3 generations of broken homes. And it was so clear to me that he has something that I just can't even, I can't get to that. I can't buy that. I can't change to be that. I need to be transformed to be that.
Mm.
And I basically asked him if he could teach me how. So that's what happened.
Wow. That's very cool. So what do you say to people, because you'll have people who, see something like We Are the World, or when they see, you know, celebrities give a certain amount of money, um, they respond with, well, I don't have $1 million, I'm not a multimillionaire. What can I do? I know, you know, again, I can attest for the fact that even if you don't have a lot of money, you can still help other people. I mean, my mom, again, showed me that firsthand by getting involved. But, I know I had a guest a few years ago on the show who said, people need to understand that you need to get to a point where um, you have to do what you can with what you have. Don't worry about making your first million before you start to give
Yeah.
back. So,
Yeah.
what is your word of advice to those people who think, well, I can't give back because I don't have anything to give?
When you give, it changes you um, powerfully. And if you give consistently out of conviction, out of overflow, it makes you have more vision, actually, you know, and gives you joy and gives you peace. And it feels good and it's right. You know from the inside out that this is the right way to be. So that's what I would say. I think we were wired for generosity. And then if we're not if we're not being generous, sacrificial every month of our lives, every week of our lives in one way or another, we're actually living outside of how we were ideally designed to function. So when we don't give, I think we harm ourselves primarily. So on a practical level, it's remarkable that in America, we there's so much we can give, right? And I would say, from the standpoint of principle, there are three things that I think everybody who cares about anything will give is time, treasure, and talent. And I think if you give all three, you will be a much happier person. You give of your time, you volunteer somewhere, or you can even volunteer online and promote a cause without even being physically present, but you're giving your time, you're giving your talent. What is it that you can do? What gift do you have to promote a cause that serves the poor? I mean, you can be a manager and you can have flyers for Ascend Academy, for example, printed, and you just put them on your friend's desk. That's talent, right? You use Canva, you design something, and you spend a little bit of time spreading the word. Maybe you get a fundraiser going. It doesn't have to be a lot of money. It doesn't have to be high net worth individuals, but also give money, right? Give treasure. And for example, for us with Ascend, to give a child all of these things for a month, right? Uniform, capacity to meet at a good building, to be mentored, to get a meal a day, they get a meal a day. It's $100 a child. It's not a lot of money. If you think about
Right.
middle class America, there's so much waste. There's so many ways that we spend money that is just really, if you look at your bank account, at your statement, you go, why am I spending $50 a month on just Starbucks, for example, right? Or
Right.
100 sometimes,
Yeah.
like, really, do I need all of these subscriptions to
Yeah.
all the streaming services that
Yeah.
amount to $80, $90 a month? Yeah, and you start going down, just down line by line by line. I think you can find 20, 50, $100 a month easy. But then you have a connection to something that is functioning. You have feedback. You hear from those people. We even lead trips there every year, every 2 years. We go there and get some donors together, and we all go there and we hang out with these kids. It's so, so good.
Yeah. Yeah. That's super cool. What shifting gears a little bit here, what got you into the music business initially? Was music always something that was part of your life, or,
Yeah,
what
yeah.
brought that on?
I was very musical since I was a child, right? So I would sing. So my instrument was my voice, and I had a sort of a natural tone. So my mom and dad, they would have visitors at the house, and they would go, "Okay, Christian, sing us a song," and I would literally just sing a cappella something, and my voice was pretty good, so they enjoyed it, and it was a thing. Then eventually, I got into when I was in Africa, we had a little uh, children's choir that were all expats, Latin kids, and would sing all these with guitars and stuff like that. We would sing Latin American classics. So, and then I'm in Africa, right? So I'm exposed to all these rhythms, all these incredible harmonies. I mean, people there, you can see fishermen at work, like pulling nets out of and they would sing, and they have like this insane tradition of harmonies that I mean, no one taught them formally, and they're just beautiful. Of course, the syncopated rhythms, the drums, all of that stuff sort of sinks in, right, at some level.
Yeah.
And so eventually I make it to Russia. And of course, I'm this odd guy, right? I'm not really Slavic looking at all. I look Latin. And then it just happened to be sort of when the Soviet Empire collapsed. Until then, it was like impossible for me to, like, I'm not a government approved type of person, right? Very not Soviet in all kinds of ways.
Right.
And then, and it was a free market all of a sudden for just a window of time until it started closing down again. And I was doing this fresh Western sounding eclectic music, and I danced, and so that's basically how it all of a sudden it all came together as a winning formula that moved millions of people.
Yeah. Very cool. I mean, do you ever envision it getting to that level when you're, as you were growing up?
Not a million years. I mean, I even went to college. I got a master's degree in economics, and I was just going to go the normal route of,
Right.
professionals. And but then, like halfway through college, because I could see the sort of the world shifting, right? And actually I had a friend who told me, you can dance, you can sing. Maybe you can just be an artist. And no one had told me that before, So, and I was like, so I started thinking about it, right? Like it sort of you ruminates, it sort of bounces around your heart, your mind, and then you go, well, what if, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
worth a shot. And yeah, I just gave it a shot, and it just the timing was good. What I had was competitive, I guess,
Yeah.
and it just blew up.
It's funny how that story alone aligns with what you're doing now with those kids who are now saying they want to be a doctor or a lawyer or an
Yeah,
entrepreneur.
yeah, yeah,
Until someone said to you,
yeah,
why don't you look into being an artist? Like it never
yeah,
occurred to you, but you just needed that one person. Like there's that one person who
yeah.
sees something in you that you don't see, and that's what you're doing for those kids.
And actually, that's what I'm doing with my high performance coaching. Is so this is a completely different level, right? I work mostly with professionals, and it's the same thing. I can see in them more potential that they see in themselves. And I can say, okay, here are the steps that you take. This is the mindset change that you need. And I mean, I don't think I've ever told anyone, yeah, I think you're an imposter. I think you know, you're overvalued, right? Every single person that comes to me end up having, a promotion. They need making changes because they see themselves now on a higher level than they have been before. So that's what I do for professionals here in the US as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's as a coach, that's what you're doing at any level, whether it's
That's exactly it. Yeah.
sports coaching like my background was. I mean, I remember times where, we were in a tight game and I would make a move and, it worked out. Not always, but it worked out a high percentage of the time. And, I'd have some of my assistant coaches say like, man, we thought you were losing it when you made that substitution in that spot.
Hmm.
But again, there was something I felt in a certain player who I knew, you know, when inserted into this position,
That's exactly
at
it.
that
Yeah.
time of the game that he would be able to perform and excel. And again, a lot of times they didn't necessarily see it in themselves, but you do have to kind of give
Yeah.
that vote of confidence and,
Yeah.
understand like, look, I believe in you, and this is the way we're going to go with it. So
At some point, I can see clearly, I can see you more clearly than you can see yourself. And that's actually true about all of us,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, because we're in the
Um,
woods. When you're in the
yeah,
woods and you're
yeah,
right there and
yeah.
everything's around you, you can't see beyond that. And that's where a coach comes in.
That's exactly it. That's
Yeah.
exactly it. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. So, um, we've talked about so many different things, but um, is there anything that you think we missed that would be important to our listeners before we start to wrap things up?
I would say maybe a couple of things. Most of your listeners are in the US, I think.
Yes.
I wrote a book called Little Book of Big Reasons to Love America. And the book is really about, it is about America, but from the standpoint of an immigrant, right? And you can look it up on Amazon if you'd like. And it's really about how beneficial living in this country is. The environment is beneficial compared to many other countries, most other countries, for human flourishing, right? And that people, we just don't see that. You guys don't see that as locals, right? People from the outside would come in and would go, "This is amazing," and you like complain about stuff and go, "Seriously, you shouldn't be complaining as much, right?" Okay,
Yeah.
nothing is ideal, but and the reason I tell you this is that one of the benefits of me coaching professionals here in the US is that I can see much more clearly than they do that they have an environment that is incredibly hospitable for the pursuit of happiness, which is really a core American value.
Yeah.
And I am continuously surprised at how often Americans who were supposed to, believe in the pursuit of happiness actually stop pursuing happiness
Yeah.
and just
Yep.
settle for certainty over flourishing,
Yeah.
you know? And to me, what I want to say, look, if you live in this country, buy my book, be encouraged, but pursue happiness because this is a great place for it.
Yeah.
It really, really is. At any age, it's never too late. Find the courage to understand, okay, these are things that have me plateaued. And I've always wanted to be this and be that. And of course, you are a living example of that, right, Dan? Like you have been living this very unique, specific lifestyle for 5 years. And you love it, right?
Yeah.
And and what I want to tell you is that if you were Dan Clouser in, let's say, Spain, even sort of most of the first world, you probably it would be much harder to pull it off there. Not to mention, of course, if you were in Mozambique or you were in Russia or Ukraine or other places, it would be much harder to do what you do
Yeah.
there than you're doing here. So we have this incredible advantage if we live in this beautiful country to actually give us an opportunity to pursue happiness and aim high with our lives. And the thing that makes me sad and inspires me to do what I do, even as a coach, is people that go, I've settled for way too long. I'm done being settled.
Yep.
I want change. I
Yep.
actually want to pursue happiness. So that's sort of my last bit here.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I mean, that is definitely something that our society drives home to us is that, you go to high school, you go to college, you immediately put yourself in a large amount of debt, and then you get a job and just, you work the
Yeah.
rest of your life, paying off that debt, and hopefully you live to a point of retirement age, and then maybe you have, you
hmm
know,
Yeah.
10, 15 years to enjoy it. So
Yeah.
I think a lot of that just comes down to courage to make that
It
leap,
does. It does.
and say, I'm just not going to do what society is telling me, the norm. Like I'm gonna break that mold and
Yeah.
do something. And to be able to hear that from someone who's as well traveled as you, that we need to recognize the opportunity that even though society is telling us to take this path, like we do have the opportunity to jump off that road and carve our own path. So
You really do. And this
yes,
is the best place to do it is here in America.
yeah. So that just brings me to one other point I want to talk about before we wrap up. Again, you're very well traveled. I mean, I travel around the U.S. and Canada, and at some point we'll get into Mexico, I'm sure. But, you've done a lot of traveling. Like, how
Yeah.
has seeing all those different cultures molded you and given you, like, how has that affected your perspective on life? I mean, obviously, you just shared some of it with you as far as
Yeah.
what this country has to offer, but, overall, like seeing all those different cultures and, poverty to riches and everything in between, like, how has that really, been able to affect your perspective?
I would say I love this country. It really is my favorite country. I've been to 42 plus countries.
Wow.
Um, and I think, you know, traveling is a great thing, right? Traveling nationally, I mean, the US I mean, US and Canada and Mexico, it's a continent, like that in itself is a great, set of experiences. Um, but I think just connecting with people and learning different perspectives is very enriching.
Yeah.
So I advise anyone who can afford it to travel quite a bit, because first of all, you just love what people bring to the table that you don't have direct access to within your culture. And America, it's not even one culture; it's many cultures, right?
Yeah, well, that's one thing I can attest to is that the differences in
Yeah.
cultures,
Oh,
that
it's
we've
incredible.
experienced from, Alabama to North Carolina to Texas to Alaska, California, like we are this huge melting pot of all these cultures in the United States, and that's
Exactly.
had a huge change of, my own
Yeah.
perspective. So that's why I wanted to see with you. I've been to 46 states and two countries so far. You said how many? 40, 42
42
state
countries,
countries?
42
I mean,
countries. Yeah.
like I can't even imagine. So sorry to interrupt you, but like, yeah, that perspective is important.
It's very enriching. You learn about food, about culture, about mindset, and you actually learn from people, right? You go to the Mediterranean, you realize that it's probably not healthy to be a workaholic. They're so chill, okay? And they just enjoy life so much. It's just addictive. You go, my gosh, I need to enjoy life so much, right? So you go to Africa and you see them, even you go to church in Africa, right? You go to church here and then you go to church in Africa and you see them singing and dancing at church and the joy is just through the roof. And you go, man, what is wrong with me? I should have a little bit more of that. So I can tell you stories after stories after stories of just how richer you feel by learning from other cultures. And the reverse is true as well, is that you realize that you start appreciating your own country, your own culture even more as well. So I love, when I go internationally, I go internationally every year, basically, for decades now. So sometimes it's 3, 4 countries a year.
Wow.
And when I come back to the US, because I'm such a US fan, I just breathe better, right? I go, it's good to be home,
Yeah.
you know? Things just work. They run on time. People are respectful. People have this level of excellence about what they do. Everything works better in America. Um, you're free. Everything is efficient. You don't have you don't understand how efficient everything is wherever you live in the United States until you hit some of those places. You go, what is wrong with you guys, right? It's like, you know, uh, there's so much here that's amazing, and 72% of people on Earth live under some sort of authoritarian regime today, not 100 years ago today. So this is what 5.7 billion, something like that. So you forget how valuable and how good it feels to be free, truly free and unafraid, until you experience some level of lack of freedom and fear in the air, when there's limitations to these things.
Yeah.
And you go back and you go, this is the best place on earth. So it's sort of both, right? You appreciate your country more and you learn from others if you travel.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the learning from others is so important because to learn from others, you actually have to take time to have a conversation with them
Yeah.
and listen to them, not
Yeah.
just talk and not just think about the next thing you're going to say, like actually listen and have a
Yeah.
conversation. That's been, again,
That's why I
even,
don't do that's why I don't do cruises.
yeah,
I don't do cruises, and I don't do hotels. I do usually Airbnbs. Why? You talk to a local person, you go to the market, you go shopping, you make your own food, you make friends, you stick around,
yeah,
and you go to these non-touristy places that are just so authentic. That's how you learn.
yeah, yeah. And that's the same with campgrounds. I mean, you walk around a campground, you're going to talk to people, like
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
just going
yeah,
to talk to people. And that's
yeah,
the greatest thing about our lifestyle is just, I mean, even today I talked to, you know, three new people that I'd never met today before you and I jumped on this
yeah,
on this show, and
yeah,
you
yeah.
have these incredibly amazing conversations with these people and learn from them what they're doing and why they're doing and what got them to Galveston, Texas in the month of March, so
Hmm.
I think it's so important to just talk to people. So Christian, where can people find you on the internet if they want to find out more about you, if they want to find out about some of the work you're doing? How can they find you?
So we talked a little bit more about Ascend Academy. So you go to ascend.academy, and that's where you find about the work that we do in Africa. Would love for you to reach out to me if you want to be part of it. You want to donate one time, you can donate, once a month. But it's such an exciting work. If you feel like some of the stuff that we talked about, Dan and I today, it was equipping to you, probably the easiest thing to do is subscribe to my newsletter. I have a Substack newsletter, and the URL is christianrayflores.com. And I put a lot of effort into that. So twice a week, we have one post that is just for everybody, free subscribers. One post that is much more of a deep dive, that is for people who subscribe for like $7 a month, that kind of thing. That's a great way to just stay connected, just get a lot of inspiration, insights, strategies for success and significance. And then if you're one of the few people that go, man, I really need to work with this guy. I'd like to find out about the coaching programs. Go to exponential.life. So exponential is spelled without the E, starts with an X. And that's where sort of the work we do with professionals is highlighted, and you'll learn all about it. There's a great free assessment there that gives you a report. You can complete it in about 5 minutes in your inbox that gives you, well, okay, here's where I'm at. Where do I want to go from here? So it's a great tool as well.
Yeah, I love it. And I'll put links to all those in the show notes so that make it easy. People just click on the links and
Yeah, thank you.
find where they want to go. So that brings us to our final question. As you know, the subtitle of the podcast is "Many Little People in Many Little Places," which comes from the opening lyrics of Michael Frante's song "Gloria," which go, "When many little people in many little places do many little things, and the whole world changes." So what's one of the little things that Christian does on a daily basis to make the world a little bit better place?
I would then counter with a, who was it? Yes, I think it was a quote from Mother Teresa, who said, "There's no great things, only small things with great love, done with great love." Um, and I think that's really the answer to a flourishing life is I I have a community of friends here, a faith community. I invest in them very, very intentionally. I see them maybe one, two, three times a week. The most important people, this sort of the inner circle. And then there's other circles outside of that. I love my wife to death, my kids. I cook my wife breakfast every morning. And I serve her breakfast every morning, you know. And the reason
Wow.
I do those things is because is what you said, right? Is a life is not made by great accomplishments. It's really made by small investments done with love that are very, very, very personal. And that sometimes can transcend the little, right? It becomes great.
Yeah.
But the truly great is really made of the littles, the many,
Yeah.
many little things.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. Christian, this was a great conversation. I really enjoyed taking out the time and getting together with me today. We could have went on for, hours and hours, I'm sure,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
had to wrap this up. But I really do appreciate you taking the time and if I know we'll get back through Austin at some point, I'll definitely look you up. I'd love to be able to get together.
Yeah, let's connect.
If
Absolutely.
it works out. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. And for everybody out there listening, be sure to check out my other podcasts and blogs at journeymymotherson.com. While you're there, check out our Pay It Forward program, where you can buy a copy of one of my books, and Sandy and I will donate it to somebody somewhere along our travels. So, Christian, once again, thank you so much. It's a great, great conversation.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.
You bet.